And we pray that you would bless all of us who are here tonight, and especially Neil as he brings us your truth, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, Happy New Year. I'm glad you're all here. Welcome back. It's going to be a great year ahead. We're just working on getting all of the final details set up, but... Oh, I'm hearing a phone from somewhere, or is that reverb? Okay, anyway, we are currently in the finalizing stages, but it looks like VAC is going to be the second Saturday of every month now. So second Saturday of every month. Stay tuned for the emails to confirm that, but for now, that's what it looks like it's going to be. We're just working through all the final stages with the church to get that all set. So if you'd like to keep up with the VAC and you're not already on the mailing list, vac.org/signup, vac.org/signup. So all of those of you who, okay, how many of you guys are on the mailing list and did get the email for tonight? Okay, perfect. So for whoever didn't raise their hand, go vac.org/signup so that you can be brought up to date on all of our next events. Also, how many of you guys need a church tomorrow? If you need a church, all right, come here 9 or 11 o'clock, 2 services. Got so packed that we had to do 2 services, and now both services are packed. So come tomorrow morning, either 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock for church. Also, I'd like to remind everybody, it is flu season. Even though we've only had 2 cases of the flu in all of Santa Clara County. Please wash your hands. And don't cough on anybody, my goodness. And then, okay, I think that was it for notes. Mom, do we have anything else? Okay, be sure to check out the tables in the back. We have Neil's table back there, which is his No Blind Faith books and some other books. And then we also have Kevin McGarry back there, who is representing the EBLM, the Every Black Life Matters, which I'm sure Neil will touch on. He and Kevin helped co-found that together. Anything else? We have church. Oh, upcoming speakers. Okay, so Dr. Judy Mikovits had to cancel for today, but she will be, Lord willing, for next month. So we'll have Dr. Judy Mikovits for next month, Lord willing, and then after that, can I announce who's after that, maybe, tentatively? Okay, so Dr. Jeff Barkey. How many of you guys know that name? You've heard of him? So he's on TV a lot and has floated around social media back when social media existed. He has a shaved head, goatee. He is a physician down in Southern California, LA area, and he's a big proponent of big on the Reopen California movement. He's on the news a lot. He's on social media a lot. He's at a lot of the rallies. So he's going to be an exciting one. We saw him on the news, and we thought, hey, let's call him and see if we can get him to come. We called him next morning. He gave us a call back and said, hey, I'd be interested in coming. So that would be, so we have, oh, that's Neil's iPad. Neil, your iPad's right here. That's what was distracting me the whole time. Oh, yes. Hey, Neil, he found your iPad for you. Thank you. It was right here. I was wondering what was beeping at me. I was just hoping it wasn't a bomb or something. So Dr. Jeff Barkey, that's going to be a great one. Basically, his whole thesis is if you're vulnerable, stay home, or compromised, stay home. Otherwise, everyone else should just go about their daily lives because you got to get immune to it eventually. And so that was his whole philosophy. He's treated patients with COVID and all that. So he's going to be an exciting one. Stay tuned. We have other exciting speakers lined up. So let's see. So now that Neil found his iPad, Neil, are you ready to go wherever he is? There he is. Okay. So we're so excited to finally welcome Neil because, as you guys know, last fall he was on the schedule and then someone else pop up, and then he graciously allowed Charlie Kirk to come speak in his place. And so that was awesome. But we were like, Neil, you've still got to speak. And then we scheduled Neil again, and then someone else was able to come, and the schedule got mixed up. And so finally now we're so excited that Neil, our one and only Neil, is able to come and speak. So for those of you guys who don't know, I'll just give a brief bio for Neil, for those of you guys who are new. It's been such an awesome blessing to work under Neil for the last few years as the working for the VAC and It's been great to look up to him. I always love finding people who are smart that are also Christians and conservative and apologists, and Neil is definitely one of those. Because you find a lot of religious people in religions, and they got the faith part. Neil's got the faith part and the no blind part, hence why he has no blind faith. So Neil's a non-hyphenated first-generation American immigrant. He's an engineer by day and an apologist at night. As an engineer, he spends his time designing video and networking systems, computer chips, and other boards. He also has, 25 patents? Only 16. Oh, only 16 patents. Neil was born in Ghana and grew up in Sudan and Yemen. He came to the U.S. for college and earned his BS and master's in solid-state physics and computer engineering. Neil has co-founded 4 startup companies in the Silicon Valley, and he has, your bio here says 20 issued and pending patents. So, okay. Neil's the founder of No Blind Faith, an apologetics, theology, and evangelization ministry. And apologetics is the investigation and defense of the truth of Christianity using facts, reason, and science, history, archaeology, and philosophy. Neil's a speaker at conferences around the U.S. He's been featured on NPR debating Eric Rothschild at the ACU, Eugene Scott, and over 40 radio stations and TV shows, including the Eric Metaxas Show, who, of course, we had him here. Wasn't that great to have him here this fall? Lars Larson Show, Bob Ducko Show, American Family Radio. So without further ado, let's welcome my personal friend and one of my great mentors, Neil, before he kicks me off for saying too many great things about him.
Thank you. We have a quick announcement. There's a Chrysler out there in the handicap zone that has its lights on. So if you own a Chrysler and you're parked in the handicap zone, make sure you go out there and turn the lights off. Otherwise, you'll be using a jump start, which is fine. I'm sure there are lots of them here. But let me start by when the elections were starting, we were worried that a lot of people would, if it was announced truthfully, a lot of chaos would come around. And people were asking us for signs that they could put up, sort of like a protection. So, if you have this outside your house, you're not going to get burnt down by Antifa, was the idea. So we made a bunch of these, and you can buy one of them in the back. They're $15. It's cheaper than the AR-15. And then in line with that, we also, for those of you who don't know, I guess there might be some people here. So this is the biblical alternative to Black Lives Matter, right? It's pro-life, anti-Marxist, and pro-nuclear family. We've had a lot of discussions. We may be doing a conference with the Heritage Foundation. There's a bunch of stuff taking off. It's kind of exciting, and I'm very happy to be working with Kevin McGarry, so you'll find him out there and have a chat with him. We also, we're talking to a bunch of people, and we realized that it would be nice if you had a Christmas gift for your kids to teach them about what our principles are. And so my daughter and I wrote this book. It's called Does Every Black Life Matter? It's a primer, and it goes through, it's a kid's version. And we have a star here. Evan DiGiorgio is starring in it. His parents are here. Evan's not here. But so if you want that, that's in the back too. But it's Christmas is over because Amazon couldn't get them to me on time. Isn't that interesting? But anyway. So let's start. If we can switch to my slides there. We can... I realize without my iPad how lost I am without my technology. In the old days, I would actually have a printout. It would be like this many pages. Okay, great. So how many of you have been told or have read that our U.S. Constitution has no relationship to the Bible and was not based on Christian principles, but was based only on Greek principles? And I have heard that many times. Or it's related to the Enlightenment. Now, there was some Greek influence on our Constitution, but we must remember that the Greeks failed at a free government. So I'm going to give you some evidence today and kind of teach you about the background of our Constitution and show you that our Constitution is significantly based on the Bible and not much else. So for today's session, I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories, a few historical facts, and then I'm going to weave them all together to make sense, I hope. So the first story I want to tell you is a story about my daughters. I have, and that's the title, What Was God's Plan for Government? There's our agenda, we'll skip that. But I want to tell you about my daughters. First story is about my daughters. I have 2 lovely daughters and 1 very, very cute son, as you can see. But I fear I ruined my eldest daughter. You see, she used to love Disney princess movies. But she also likes talking about deep things. And she also despised Barack Obama. I have no idea why. Okay, maybe it's because I expressed my views about him being something like a drug dealer. I think I said something like he'd been giving people free stuff and getting them hooked on it so they would become dependent on him, and they would always vote for him. And I probably drew many analogies to a drug dealer. So at some point in the conversation, one conversation, I guess it was a significant fact that one conversation went like this. And Mary Catherine was 7 at the time, and Obama was president, and it started like this. And we were talking about China, and Mary Catherine says, "Dad, if you had 2 children in China, would they kill you?" Me, no, I think they'd find you a lot of money or something. Mary Catherine, why did they do that? Me, because they didn't want too many people. Mary Catherine, why is having too many people bad? To which I would say, well, it's not really bad. The earth can hold a lot of people easily, but they were foolish and made a lot of mistakes because now the Chinese have too many boys. Mary Catherine, what's wrong with too many boys? Me, because if there aren't enough women, the men can't get married. Men need women to make them responsible and have families. Me, and then when too many men are not married, they get into roving gangs and do stupid things. Mary Catherine, like taking drugs, drinking too much, and then voting for Obama? Yep, something like that. But one day while Obama was still president, I made a big mistake. She asked me if the president was like a king, and I said no. But then I said, well, Obama's acting like one. She said, how? I said, well, he's collecting all the taxes from everyone and giving it to his friends. It's what kings used to do. Collect taxes from the common folks and then give it to his dukes and his knights and use them and the lords and use them to collect more taxes for him, right? And then he would give them more power. And then I said, come to think of it, that's exactly what Congress is doing today. Takes all our money and then gives it to their cronies who help them stay in power. I tell you, that's why we fought a revolution against England. But that's when everything went haywire. And she said, well, I thought kings were good. I said, no, they actually aren't. Because you have to ask, how do they get to be king? If you're older, like me, you'll know where this slide is from. How do they get to be king? By exploiting the workers, by hanging on to outdated imperialist dogma which perpetuated the economic and social difference of our society. Okay. The point being that kings got to be kings by violence, in most cases, by killing people. I explained that most earthly kings gain and keep power through violence or oppression. And that's why Americans wanted to be free. And that's why American founders fought a revolution. Human kings were a bad idea. They're just oppressors of freedom, of liberty, and of a free people. No, wait, you say, wait a minute. I thought you conservatives liked kings. You like the ruling class and strict rules that control and oppress people. You guys are more to the right. And so they have a spectrum, right? To the left is communism and socialism, and to the right is fascism and Nazism, and we're on the right. In fact, we're so far on the right, and to the left is you have Antifa, and to the right you have the Nazis, right? And we're so far on the right, they put us almost right next to fascists, conservatives and Tea Party people. See, that's a progressive's creation, created specifically to taint the minds and hearts and convert you and your children. But that's not at all what reality is. And today I want to clarify that so you can teach your kids and grandkids the truth. Are we conservatives? Or actually, we shouldn't actually call ourselves conservatives. We are what are called classical liberals. You see, we Christians used to be the liberals. For years, those who wanted the government to stay out of our business and our economy and only be there to protect our rights were considered classical liberals. We wanted more liberty. And in fact, think about why did the conservative Christian pilgrims leave England and come here? Because they wanted more government control? No, because they wanted less. Thank you. And then why did 200 years later, why did the colonists fight against Britain? Because they wanted a government to what? To leave them alone. We are the ones that want minimal government interference, but the progressives wanted everyone to think that they were more liberal, they were more free, they were more permissible. And after all, it sounds so much better that they started using the word liberal for themselves. And they took over the word liberal since it was controlled by the media. But we are the ones who want more liberty. We are the classical liberals. If anyone asks you, are you conservative? You say, actually, I'm a classical liberal. Let me tell you the next story. It's about when the Jews wanted a king. And God, what did God say? God said, that's a great idea? No, God said that's a terrible idea. In fact, 1 Samuel 8 says, and so all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, you're old and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them. Warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve his chariots with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourself will become slaves. And when that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king that you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all other nations with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. And the Lord answered and said, listen to them and give them a king. Kings were bad. God had a better plan for government and for liberty. Most of us would call God's plan a theocracy, but it's not the way you think it is. It's not the Spanish Inquisition style, and we'll get to that later. But the people, it seemed, look at that story. The people seem to have this inbuilt desire to be controlled, to be taken care of, to be fed, to be led, to be sheep, to be told what to do. We want a king. Give us a king. Well, back to my daughter. Little did I realize that this little 7-year-old would figure out what follows from my screed against kings. You see, if kings have come to their power illegitimately, and princesses are daughters of kings, that means princesses have come to their power illegitimately. And worse, if kings are oppressors, then princesses are just continuing the oppression. So she stopped liking princesses and princess movies. She's 14, turning lawyer. Now, at some point I determined, well, I got to avoid having these conversations with my then 3-year-old because otherwise I'm going to ruin her too. I should wait until she's at least 13, but that didn't work. Here's why it didn't work. It didn't work because my younger daughter would be watching a princess movie, and somewhere along the line, the king in the movie said something like this, well, my daughter, for last many generations, our family has ruled this land. And my older daughter will yell from the dining room, yes, and how? By oppressing the masses, taking power, and forcing everyone to pay taxes. I was doomed. But then this is the problem, isn't it? Most kings come to power by violence or force because nobody has authority to say, you must treat me like king except the one who has authority, right? Which would be God. Since kings don't have the authority to tell you to be their subjects, they must take power violently and force you into subjugation and then keep you there with threats of violence. So, here's what we have. Here's our options. We have a kingdom, a dictatorship, a monarchy, an imperialism, a despotism, right? We have a what type of government is non-representative? The supreme law. Who decides the supreme law? Well, the king decides the supreme law. I am the king. I am the law, right? Who are the judges? Well, the king appoints the judges. The lesser laws, who decides those? Oh, well, the king decides those. The lesser laws are based on the whims of the ruler. The moral laws, oh, what is right and what's wrong? I'll decide what's right or wrong. The ceremonial laws, well, you have to do this for me. You have to dress like this. You have to play this song. Punishments, I'll decide what's bad and what's good. If you steal my food, you die. If you steal somebody else's food, I'll decide it, right? Civil laws, well, usually with the civil law, they would decide. Civil laws are like the laws, well, how tall should the door be? How many steps? How deep can a step be? We have those all over the place, right? So they were decided by somebody, but again, it was decided by the ruler. And public involvement, absolutely what? None. You were serfs. But here's the problem. A monarchy can't exist for very long. Why? Think about it. Because the dictator needs loyal men to protect him and keep his kingdom under subjugation. I mean, remember in the Bible, they have these kings that come to power and they last 3 days and somebody kills them and makes themselves the king, right? So a monarchy can't last. It's very unstable. Very unstable. So instead, you have what we call an oligarchy. What's an oligarchy? An oligarchy is a group of elites. What the king says is, look, like Saddam Hussein, he says, look, I'll be the guy in charge, and you guys will all be my generals, and I will give you lots of power, the knights and the dukes. Remember that? In the kingdom. They are the people. That's the oligarchy there. The one guy decides to be the head. These are the elites. They collaborate to maintain power. An oligarchy is one of the most stablest forms of government. Now, most people put a theocracy under the oligarchy, and you'll see why that is not true at all. It's a completely incorrect classification. So, we can see that now, instead of the ruler, it's decided by the elites, all those lines there by the elites. Again, the people have no say. They're serfs. And you go, okay, well, obviously that's bad. So let's go to the other extreme. What's the other extreme? No government. What if we had no government? Wouldn't be that easy. Imagine there's no government. It's easy if you try, okay? No, John Lennon never said that, but you can imagine something like that, okay? So that's called an anarchy. No government. There are no rules. There's no Supreme Court. There's no judge. Every man does what they want, right? What happens when you have anarchy? You get Somalia, right? What is Somalia? That is where there are no kings, no government. So what happens is warlords take over. The most powerful person chooses. He kills everybody else, and he takes over, and you get warlords. And guess what? Oligarchy. Guess what happens to an anarchy? It actually ends up in an oligarchy. Right? The warlord says, hey, we can take over this land. And you end up, in fact, many kings took over that way. You see, a true anarchy, that is where there's no kings, no rulers, no government, cannot exist in any population of men for very long. Our founders understood this fully. Because in an anarchy where there's no one in power, immediately results in evil men jostling to take power through violence, which eventually leads right back to the dictatorship or monarchy. So monarchies and oligarchies are bad. And anarchies become oligarchies. In fact, monarchies become oligarchies. So we can still see the oligarchy is the most stable form of government. So if you wanted an oligarchy, what would you do to get an oligarchy? How about having absolute chaos and having an anarchy and then being the strongest one left standing? How do you get to an oligarchy? You start with an anarchy. You destroy the existing government and you get an anarchy. Okay. But our founders wanted a stable life, protected from bad people, bad actors, bad kings, and bad dictators. So how about democracies and republics? Now, remember, some people may be tempted to think that monarchies and oligarchies are the only situation where everyone does not have equal rights, but that would be not correct. You can have a democracy and a republic and not have equal rights. Remember, Greece was a democracy, Rome was a republic, nobody had equal rights there, right? Unless you were of the elite. So that's got nothing to do with it. So let's look at democracies. A democracy, a pure democracy not based on objective natural law, is based on majority rule. So let's understand non-natural law. A democracy means that a public gets to vote on everything and anything. In other words, the majority decides and rules. The majority decides if one crime is good, one crime is bad. They decide if something is wrong or something is right. It's a pure democracy. If the majority decides it's okay to take the money from the Jews and throw them in a concentration camp, well, it's a democracy. They decided to do that, right? And if you look at this, in a democracy, it's a vote of the masses. The Supreme Court law is decided by the masses. The judges are elected by the masses. The lesser laws are voted by the masses. The lesser laws are based on the desires of the masses. And you've seen some pure democracies like in San Francisco. If you take a dog out of a car and kill it, you will get 10 years in prison. But if you're an illegal immigrant and kill a young girl, you get to walk free. Especially if you claim that you found the gun lying in the park in a city that is known for its what? Gun laws. Right? Why? The democracy, the people decided that killing a dog was worse than killing a person. So it's based on majority rule. Now, what did the founding fathers think about democracies? Let's see what they said. Let's look at Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton said, "We are now forming a republican form of government. Real liberty is not found in the extremes of a democracy, but in the moderate governments. If we incline too much to democracy, we shall soon shoot into a monarchy or some other form of dictatorship." Do you see that? He thought a democracy would lead back to the King of England style rule. Hamilton, in the last letter he ever wrote, warned that our real disease is democracy. Thomas Jefferson declared that democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. Benjamin Franklin has supposedly said democracy must be something more than two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. To which someone added, liberty is when the lamb has an AR-15. Okay, actually, they didn't use the word AR-15. They said well-armed. Okay, John Adams says, remember, democracy never lasts soon. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. James Madison said, pure democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have been incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Now, why did they say this? In fact, they call democracies mobocracies. It sounds good, like we should all be able to vote for what we want, right? Makes sense. Because they realized that democracy was mob rule. Mob rule is subject to the whims of the masses who could be led by a fanatic, crazy person. Remember Robespierre and the French Revolution that came right after our revolution? The insane Robespierre convinced the masses to effectively vote with him to guillotine anyone he was able to turn them against. There was no fixed basis for the law. The law was whatever the masses decided it was. There was no objective morality. And what happened to the French Revolution? Do you know what happened? Where did they end up? They end up in an empire with Napoleon. Right? So they had the king, they had an emperor. David Barton says a democracy is the ruled by the majority feeling, what the founders describe as a mobocracy. A republic is a rule of law. And so now we turn to a republic. Let's understand what a republic should be. For instance, ancient Rome was a republic, but it wasn't a very good example of it. So was pre-civil rights United States. It was a republic, but yet the slaves had no rights. So a republic is first governed by the rule of law. And by the rule of law, we talk about the laws of nature. Declaration of Independence claimed the laws of nature, nature's God, the objective moral code. Only one person is allowed to determine what is good and bad, and that is God. Right? He's the objective source of the law. So all laws must come from him. A republic is based on, the second one is representative government. So a republic is based on a fixed moral code that overrides all other laws, right? And that is what we call, what? Do you know what our fixed moral code? A fixed moral code is the laws of nature, nature's law. It's not the Constitution, actually. From that, we get the Constitution, because remember, the Constitution is just how our government is formed. It does not form the moral basis of our, if anything, the moral basis is formed by the Declaration of Independence. So here's why it has to be a fixed moral code. The idea is that the masses can't arbitrarily change the laws to suit themselves. Think about it, right? We all get together and we decide, like the Germans did, oh, we want to kill the Jews. Now, does that become legal? Does that become moral? No, there has to be a moral code that's overriding everything. And Rome, remember, did not have that. So the question is who... when Rome was not based on objective moral laws, they were basing it on the whims of their gods, right? So the Republic had to be based on moral laws. Now the question is, how do we base our moral laws on who do we base on ours? The question is, whose morality should we legislate? Yours, mine, Hitler's, or Mother Teresa's. And I already told you whose we should, right? The answer is none of those. We don't legislate based on any one of them. We legislate what the Declaration of Independence says what? The laws of nature and nature's God. The unchanging, unmoving, fixed, objective moral laws of a God. And that's where we get the idea that all men are created equal. Okay. Now, never forget, a republic not based on natural law, God's law, would be worse than or equal to a democracy not based on natural law and God's law. So what's the second part? The second part is a representative government. Now, when I first came to the States, I remember, because here I am off the boat, coming from Yemen, fascist country, and I would say, I should run for office, and then I will ask the people what they want, and I'll do whatever they want. And I thought that was a great idea, right? Now, years later, I realized, well, that was the worst thing I could do. Why? Because a representative government has to not do with what the people want, but has to do with the conscience of the representative. You see, in a republic, unlike a democracy, the first judgment of any lesser law, now the lesser law means anything under God's moral law, right? It has to be based on the representative's conscience. Why? Because the representative should never be able to say, well, the people wanted this, so I'm going to give it to them. In fact, here's so this means that rather than voting in mass to create lesser laws, we have representatives who create those laws based on the conviction of their own consciences. American Revolution supporter. He's a British politician while the American Revolution was going on. His name was Edmund Burke. He says, your representative owes to you not his industry only, but his judgment. And he betrays you if he sacrifices to your opinion. Let me tell you why this is so important. Your representative should be voting based on his conscience. Let me tell you another story. Remember the story of the Israelites? Moses had gone up over the hill to meet God. And he's there for a long time. And the people get antsy. And the people of Israel, they've been out of Egypt just recently. They waited and waited and waited, and they waited and gathered and started talking, and they started talking to each other. And they finally went to Aaron. And what did they say? Aaron, we want you to build us what? A golden calf. The majority of us have voted for it. It's what we desire. You should give it to the people if you're a good leader. And Moses and Aaron did that, didn't he? And then when Moses came down, he said, why did you do this? What was Aaron's answer? The people wanted it. Instead, Aaron should have said, as your representative, it's my responsibility, my conscience on the line, the buck stops here. I get to make this decision based on what I think is right and what I think is true. And my wisdom says a golden calf is a bad idea. But he didn't do that, and the people died. And today we have representatives who kowtow to the public and abdicate them from the consequence of saying, well, it's what the people wanted. That's no difference from mobocracy. That's no difference from mob rule. Our representatives then, if you're going to vote for representatives, what kind of moral conscience does your representative have to have then? You better elect representatives who shares your moral compass, who's willing to say, here's where the buck stops, I'm responsible for it. Or we will end up doing what Aaron did and bringing death to our nation. John Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That means we need a republican form of government based on natural laws to protect us from dictators, from despots, from oligarchs, from democracies, from Democrats. No, sorry. A republic is the only stable form of government, but it has one large caveat. Now, let's talk about this. And this is where I think everybody gets surprised. What is a theocracy? A theocracy is a system of government in which the priests rule in the name of God or a god. Now, this is the common definition of theocracy, and I want to show you how this is completely false. This is a man-made theocracy. A man-made theocracy is where a bunch of power-hungry, rabid priests control every aspect of your life. Modern-day misunderstandings and historical documentation of the Spanish Inquisition that brought upon mankind gives us a good reason to fear a theocracy. Most man-made theocracies we should be completely afraid of. We should run away from it. We don't want a theocracy like that. I mean, nobody should want a theocracy like that. And this is what a theocracy, a man-made theocracy looks like. It's non-representative government because the government, the priests actually run it. Right? It's God's arbitrary laws, and who's this God? Nobody knows, right? It depends. Like, I lived in Yemen for 6 years. They have Sharia law. That's a theocracy. You could go to one set of these people, and they would say, well, God says this. You go to another set of people, they say, well, God says that, and they end up fighting and killing each other, and whoever wins, they get to decide the Sharia law. Okay? So, who are the judges? The priests are the judges. Lesser laws are made by priests. Everything else is God's law, quote unquote, God's law. Who's the God? Whoever they decide God is, right? And public involvement, absolutely none. This really is like a oligarchy, where the priests are in control. A theocracy. It's a small group of elites who have all the power. They force us to tithe/donate to them. They know better than us how to take care of the poor. They know better how our business should run, how much we should pay our employees, who we should hire, whom can we fire. They're the economic geniuses. They determine what we should believe, what we can or cannot say about our beliefs in public. They decide how our kids should be educated. They decide what we can or cannot eat, if we can smoke. They're not supposed to be corrupt or greedy. They aren't supposed to give special privileges to their cronies. They are these amazing, intelligent angels. So who are the masses that desire the system of government, who blindly believe that these appointed men and women can do no wrong because they're smarter, wiser, kinder, gentler, fairer, more charitable than anyone else we've ever seen in our entire experience? Now, we know this would never work, right? Where would we find these type of sinless, wise, pure angels on earth? But did you realize that I wasn't describing a theocracy this entire time? What was I describing? I was describing a statist socialism, the progressive ideal. Socialism is not social justice. Socialism is social oppression. Isn't it so funny that progressives are so worried about a theocracy, but in actual fact, they just want their own version of it. And we conservatives have always said we don't want this theocracy. Why? Because that's what we ran away from. So that first definition is wrong. So let's look at the second definition. The Commonwealth of Israel from the time of Moses unto the election of Saul the king. Let me tell you another story. Once upon a time, there was a man named Moses. He got a ragtag bunch of people and took them out of Egypt. But on the way to the promised land, the people had a lot of problems. And so he spent all day talking to them, all day trying to judge them. And he was tired, and he was busy, and he was just spending all his time being judged here, being judged there. And his wife said, Moses, this is going to be the death of you. So she told her dad, go talk to Moses. And so Jethro, who had just become a convert, came to Moses and he said, and we all know Moses looks like Charlton Heston. And Jethro says, now listen to me and let me give you some advice. You know, when your father-in-law gives you some advice, you usually take it. He said, you should explain God's laws and teaching to the people. Warn them not to break the laws. Tell them the right way to live and what they should do. But you should also choose some people to be what? Judges and leaders. You shall select from all the people competent men who reverently fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain. You shall place these people over as the people as leaders, officials of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let these rulers judge the people. If there's a very important case, then they can come to you and let you decide what to do, but they can decide the other cases themselves. In this way, these men will share your work with you, and it will be easier for you to lead the people. So this is what a real theocracy was supposed to be. Do you see that? One, the type is representative government. Why? Because they would elect the tens and hundreds and thousands. Two, what was the supreme law? It was the objective laws of God. Who are the judges? Well, they were elected by the lower levels, and the top judge was Moses. He was appointed. The Supreme Court he was. The lesser laws are discovered by the representatives. Now, the lesser laws are basically the laws that come up above the supreme law, but they're all based on the supreme law. So the lesser laws are based on the conscience of the representative, because each representative was responsible for deciding how he was going to be judged, right? And the moral laws are based on the objective laws of God. The ceremonial laws was God's laws, how you're supposed to do the ceremony. The punishments was God's law. God said this is what you'd punish. And the ones that God didn't cover, they would decide. And the civil laws were against God's laws. And the ones that he hadn't listed, they would decide. And public involvement is what? Leaders of tens, fifties, and hundreds. A God-ordained theocracy is a system of government that uses God's objective moral laws and the basis of all the laws and representatives, not priests. Which is completely different from Sharia law. And completely different from what we know of a theocracy. But this is the theocracy. Now let's go back to the theocracy here. Look at that carefully. Does that look familiar? Where have you seen that system before? Or shall I say after? In the U.S. Constitution. Do you see that? Our Constitution is based on the Bible. Do you see that? Representative government. The supreme laws are the laws of nature, nature's God. Who are the judges? They're elected judges and appointed. The Supreme Court is appointed. The lesser laws are discovered. The only difference is the ceremonial laws, because we don't have ceremonial, we have different ceremonial laws, right? When you go do this, you do that, right? And the punishments are legislated by the representatives, and the civil laws are discovered by the representation. So the question is, what should that public involvement be? Now, okay, wait a minute. There's a problem here, Neil. There's a little problem here. What did they say about the children of Israel after 400 years? After 400 years, it all fell apart. Remember the Bible says, and people were doing whatever they saw good in their own eyes? It all fell apart. Neil, it all fell apart. How can you say we should do this when it's all going to fall apart? Well, maybe it'll last 400 years, and then it falls apart. But let me tell you why it fell apart. Remember this verse? You should explain God's laws and teaching to the people. This is what Jethro tells Moses. Warn them not to break the laws. Tell them the right way to live and what they should do. But you should also choose some of the people to be judges and leaders. And now let's fast forward to when it all fell apart. 1 Samuel 8. So the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us." Samuel, one of the wisest men, one of the most godly men, his own sons were corrupt because he hadn't taught them the ways. You see, the leaders of Israel had stopped teaching the children of Israel the basis for the system of government. The priests had stopped explaining it. The teachers had stopped explaining it. Their parents had stopped explaining it. This nation had stopped explaining it. Nobody knows the what's or the worst. Nobody knows the whys. The basics and the reasons for God's laws were unknown. Even Samuel, as godly as a priest he was, when he failed to do so, his sons were horrible and evil. And you got this. In these days, there was no king in Israel, everybody that was right in their own eyes. And when the king came, everything fell apart. The system of government will only work if you understand God's laws and respect them. It will only work for immoral people. Now tell me we aren't in trouble. After the Constitution Convention was concluded in 1787, a bystander inquired of Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have you given us?" You remember Franklin's answer, right? Metaxas talked about it. What did he say? He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." The question is, can we keep it? What do you think? Now, why am I spending so much time on this? Because I want you to teach your kids these things. I want to teach your grandkids these things. You know, many people think it's enough to just vote and that ends their civic duty. Is that enough to vote? No. And when we voted men in Republican men or women in Republican form of government, we're not voting in laws, we're voting in people and consciences. So the people we elected better be godly men and women. Samuel Adams said, "Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. He therefore is the truest friend to the liberty of his country, who tries most to promote its virtue, and who will not suffer a man to be chosen into any office of power and trust who is not a wise and virtuous man." So what do we do to keep America free? So you have the freedom to worship, unlike China. 1, you run for office. Remember, I'm talking about things like school boards, even if you have no kids, the water board. I mean, you know what? If you have an empty nester, you could run for school board. You don't have to have kids. You could be a single person and run for school board if you got some free time. Do it. Right? You could run for water board. There's so many political offices that you can do, and these things make sense because these things grow into other roles. You could help somebody run for office through funding, direct involvement, or providing them the needed exposure and publicity. Open your home to local school board candidates and politicians, inviting your friends over to meet. I've seen school boards win by 200 votes. This group here could put somebody on the school board if they voted right. Teach the law and the reasons behind it. Teach other people how to vote morally and biblically. Teach your kids these things. Remember what happened to Israel. Be involved in guiding politicians who are in office using letters or meetings. You know, you write them, you meet with them. Yeah, they hate your guts. Meet with them anyway. You know, I always say, I was talking to one of the attorneys on the case here at the church, and I said, we need to be suing them over and over and over again. In fact, if anybody can sue them, they should sue them. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, well, remember the story of Jesus, that Jesus told how the woman kept going to the judge over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and the judge finally said, fine, fine. That's what we should be doing. My brother-in-law actually was the one who came up with that idea. Vote. This is a minimum. I don't think I need to tell this group. Get involved with the Election Integrity Project and in watching the ballots being counted. There's many things we can do there. But most, go undercover. Get a job with the government counting those ballots. Don't tell them you're a classical liberal. If there are more of us in there watching them. I mean, if you're retired, why not get a job with the government? They'll even give you a pension. And parents, you need to be teaching godly principles every night to your kids. Okay. Oh, that's Deuteronomy 1:13. Choose some men from each tribe who have wisdom, understanding, and good reputation, and appoint them as your leaders. So this is Deuteronomy 1:13 is where Moses repeats this to the people of Israel, showing that it was ordained by God. It wasn't that something that Jethro came up with. And I want you to look at this very careful, right? He says, so I, Moses, took the wise and respected men you had selected. You had selected, see that? That's election, right? That's an election. And appointed them to serve as judges and officials over you. Some were responsible for 1,000 people, some for 100, some for 50, and some for 10. Now, I want you to notice something very important here. See this? I asked this question, what should this number be? What should the public involvement be? What did Moses say? Moses says it should be leaders of tens, 50s, or hundreds. God wants 1 in every 10 Christians involved in making legislation. 1 in every 10 of us involved in making legislation or in some sort of leadership position. Okay. But in the end, it's the parents' job. Are you inoculating your kids from socialism? That's one vaccine I'm not afraid of. Okay, I want to go back to this slide here. Remember the slide? Left socialism, right is fascism. Fascists on the right, communists on the left, stuck in the middle with them, right? Are we really stuck in the middle? And we conservatives are supposedly all the way by the right, by the fascists, right? But that's the left's creation. Let me tell you what the reality is, right? Remember the spectrum, right? This is the spectrum. Where does fascism fit in that picture? Remember these guys? BLM, Antifa, right? The Antifa stands for anti-fascist. And their thing is the only good fascist is the dead fascist. They're basic violent socialists and communists and identify as the extreme left. And some might actually be anarchists, but if you've seen, anarchy is only a stepping stone to what? An oligarchy, right? So we're with me with that. So if you want to control over a nation, what do? Use confusion and violence to reach anarchy and make sure you're the strongest one left. Are you wondering why we've been having all these problems lately? So here's what's interesting about that. Antifa says their goal is to stop fascism, right? They consider fascists as the extreme right. They want to kill fascists. And this might be a noble goal. I don't want fascists around. Do you want fascists around? No, none of us want fascists around. But they think we're the fascists. So are we the fascists? Are we right wing? And when everybody says right and left, I always have a problem with that. Let me explain why. Because I just showed you right and left, didn't I, in that thing. And right was what? Anarchy. And left was what? Monarchy. But are we fascists? Let's look at all the right-wing fascists in history. See, I'm going to make the claim that the only good fascist is a socialist. Let's look at fascists in history. You remember this guy? He's a fascist, but he was a socialist, right? What was that? Nazi, what? National Socialist. Right? Now, why? People go, well, he wasn't really socialist. Yes, he did. He wanted free this, free that. And he says, we are socialists. We are enemies of today's capitalist economic system. He just didn't like the other socialists because he wanted to have power. Remember the oligarchy and the anarchy? We're just going to bring chaos and then we're going to take over. Okay, well, that was Hitler. What about Saddam Hussein? Saddam Hussein, he was a Ba'ath Party socialist. Syria's Hafez al-Saddam, he was a socialist, Ba'ath Party socialist as well. Jamal Abdel Nasser, Egyptian, he was a Ba'ath Party socialist. And of course, how about this guy? Gaddafi, he's a socialist too. He was a socialist. And now, I know some of you guys don't remember this, or haven't learned about it. This guy was Idi Amin, a big dictator of Uganda. Uganda, by the way, one of the most Christian nations in the world today, after they got rid of him. Idi Amin, yep, he was a socialist too. Well, how about the socialists when you think of fascists, okay, what is the one name you think of when you think of fascists? What fascist? Mussolini. Well, guess what? He was a socialist too. Well, even Caesar was a socialist. Now, why are they all socialists? Well, it's quite simply this: because kings and dictators can't maintain power unless they promise the masses something, free stuff. Hitler could not come to power without promising the masses free food, free facilities, and equality. He destroyed the existing unions only to replace them with unions loyal to him. And kings and dictators can't exist unless they promise you some big money. The big corporations and the big banks must have something of value. Hitler could not have maintained power without promising large corporations like Bayer, Daimler, Volkswagen, IBM, Siemens, BMW, and Krupp lots and lots of business and lots of free labor. And you know who made those the free labor? It was the Jews. So very clearly, we are not right-wingers. We've never been right-wingers. They meet. Why? Because even the fascists are not right-wingers. They've all been left-wingers. The only range is between monarchy and anarchy, not left and right. Total dominance by an oligarchy or liberty, justice, and freedom. See, Antifa and the Nazis and the fascists are kissing cousins, and neither of them are remotely related to what we stand for. And I did a lot of research. I finally found a picture of an Antifa catching a fascist. Because they're both socialists. See, this is what they both want. They all want this. And this is not a democracy or a theocracy, but if anything, it's a demonocracy. You want to know where fascism fits on this scale? Fits right there with the oligarchy. Because Saddam Hussein was a fascist oligarchy. So there are only two things that can prevent governments from taking over freedom. One is Christianity, and the other is a deeply taught by parents, by the nation, by the pastors, by the priests of liberty. We like to call it here as American exceptionalism. It doesn't mean we're better, because you know what? We would love it for it to spread. There's only one way to save our republic. We must teach and explain the ways of the laws of nature and of nature's God to our kids. We must raise them up in the understanding of these principles, unlike what Samuel did. But until they're grown, we must take action, for we cannot allow our children to be pawns in a game that ends in domination. Pastors should be teaching this. You should be teaching this. Okay, I did promise this. Where do we go from here? And by the way, in the Q&A session, Q&A part, we can definitely ask a lot of questions that would be otherwise kind of hard to answer, so, because I can opine there. Where do we go from here? This is a horrible roller coaster, wasn't it? But it's not over yet, is it? Okay. Just letting you know. But even if it was over, let's say the worst comes to worst, and on January 20th, the wrong side takes over the presidency. Is all lost. Now, those of you who've heard me speak before have heard me say this. In 1776, the decade of the Constitution, the founding of this great nation, right? 17%, only 17% of this country attended church. In 1850, the decade of the Republican Party was found to free the slaves. 34% of this great nation attended church. In 1890, when we had the greatest expansion of power and might and growth of our economy, 45% attended church. I want you to remember those numbers, because those are times of huge Christian influence in politics, and yet church attendance was under 45%. By 1952, it was 59%. And then it continued to grow. In 1999, it was 69%. In 2000, the number started to go down. Until today, the percentage of people who attend church is what? What do you guys think it is? Did somebody say 15? It's 52%. 80% of Americans believe in God, or some sort of God. Something like the same number pray weekly. Look, now we know that all those guys aren't Christians. And the number, by the way, I actually think there are more Christians today than there were in 1999. Why? You know why? Because now it became okay to say, I'm not a Christian. And what they've been studying is actually the people who have, what they say is the nominal Christians became nuns. I don't mean nuns. I mean none, I don't believe in anything, while the committed Christians are joining the churches. And meanwhile, atheism is dying. Did you know atheism is, at the rate atheism is going, they're going to be extinct in a few decades. All right? The Bible-believing churches are bursting at the seams. Now, prior to this COVID thing, they were growing rapidly. And now, the ones that are open are growing rapidly. Now, yes, not all folks who go to church are Christ followers, but that was true in 1776 too. So why are we hiding in our churches? Why are we acting like a scared minority? Why are we afraid of BLM and Antifa and progressives and what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what's happening in Sacramento? Do you think that those who hate liberty can muster the type of numbers that we've seen in the last few months at rallies? And street demonstrations? And the prayer event in Washington, D.C.? And those are the folks who don't have kids at home. Because the parents had to stay home and watch the kids. So when you add in all the people who stayed home, couldn't manage to travel, it's a huge number. And talking about kids, the non-religious are not having kids. 1.7 kids for every couple, atheists 1.6, agnostics 1.3. So I said atheists are dying out. Which brings us to Christians. Christians have 2.3 kids per couple. It's not enough, but if you're of child age in your family, have some more kids, We tried. We wanted 6. The non-Christians are getting older, and the Christians are getting younger. And no, the Muslims won't catch. By the way, only the Mormons and the Muslims exceed our birth rate. And the Muslims are not going to catch up because they are slowing down their birth rate. But we're getting more people becoming Christians by conversions. The only way those who hate God replenish their ranks is by brainwashing our kids in government schools. Now, do you think atheists and liberals would say, okay, I'll send our kids to your Sunday school for 1 hour a day? 1 hour a week? No. Then why are we sending our kids to their schools for 30 hours a week? Now, we can't all afford it. I totally understand this, and I totally grant that. So I'm not going to put a guilt trip. But if you can afford to pull your kids out, besides, aren't you homeschooling anyway right now? Why give them the money? If you pull your kids out, they lose money. You know that, right? There are homeschools, there's private schools, there's classical schools. There's so much stuff out there. My friends, on November 3rd, I think there was evidence of election fraud. Okay? Yeah, I know. It's weird for me to say that, isn't it? And if it seems that very few of the cases were investigated for the actual evidence, right? Most of it were technical issues that they didn't look at them. I want to see the evidence. You want to see the evidence, right? But as much as it sounded like bad news, something else happened November 3rd that nobody has reported on yet. You see, they can only control some of the states, and they can't control the people who are fleeing the other states. In the last few years, millions have been leaving the liberal blue states and going to conservative red states. Now, I know there's a problem there because they might turn those guys liberal, right? But in the interim, California lost 1 million people in the last decade. And this was a census year. That means we get to count the number of people in those red states and apply it to the House of Representatives. Did you know that on November 3rd, we took over 10 more seats in the House? We're only 7 seats for representatives from taking back the House. And what's more significant, we control 68 of 98 state chambers. That's 70%. And because this is a redistricting year, conservative states will redistrict 188 more seats in the House. That is 43% of the House is up for grabs under our control next year. You think they're going to hold the House? Oh, but they're cheating. Yes, I know they're cheating. But they can't cheat in the red states. Well, at least not most of the red states, maybe Georgia. And not everybody's going to roll over. The Family Research Council said, here's a report, paraphrased. It says, more than 24 state attorney generals have taken it upon themselves to be the last line of defense. They are in preparation to block Mr. Biden's move of an initiative called Save and Defend. And the 26 men and women who act as their states, there's 26 states, their state, that's a majority, of their state's chief law enforcers have said they will hold the line. They plan to be a legal blockade to any assault or executive order that the new president tries to throw at them. They have experience too because they took Obama to court 78 times and won 60% time of the cases. Not to mention that we want to keep pushing those lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits. Okay, that means in 2022, we could end up with a huge majority in the House, huge enough that would stop any nonsense they would try. I'm praying for something else. before that. What's the future? I'll tell you. If we hide in our churches, the future is bleak, dim, and dark. But if we gather together and engage and occupy, our future is as bright as it was in 1776, when a nation of miscreants and peasants and farmers took on the greatest nation in the world. The British Empire. The sun never set on the British Empire. And we took them on. That's their cheating. And they're cheating in the elections of swing states. How do we stop them? We just might not get the presidency. But we can stop them. We can stop them also by getting now involved in election procedures. We can stop them by setting up traps and putting people in key positions in those states. We're in a prime place for that. We can go undercover here. We can stop that by anticipating where and when they will cheat and letting them cheat and capturing the evidence. We don't need to be pawns in the game. But let me tell you this. Some of my progressive friends are on our side. Here's why. This is what I tell them. I said, progressives, if there was cheating, you should be worried too, because that means that the elites are making decisions for you. Do you want them choosing all your leaders? Remember Bernie? They don't want the cheating either to go on too long. Maybe now they're happy, but they look at that and they're afraid. Let me wrap up here. My fellow Americans, do we take the chances and risks of self-determination, or do we take on the chains of a ruler who promises security and free stuff that I promise you will never get? Which one will you choose for your life, for your nation? If you don't choose, you will get serfdom. So choose wisely. It is in your hands. Will we keep the republic that we've been given? As Ronald Reagan said, there is no left and there is no right. There is only up to freedom and liberty or down to serfdom. We're not losing this war. First of all, we know how it ends. Yes, you say, but there's lots of suffering between here and there. But I don't think this is that day. I gave you stats for America earlier. Have you looked at the rest of the world? Not only are there more Christians in the world today than any other time in history, there is a higher percentage of Christians today than any time in the history of the world. 34% of the world is Christian. In Africa, 100,000 Africans become saved every single month? No. Week? No. Every single day. Africa is already a majority Christian continent. China's Christian population is exploding. There are even Christians in Iran, which I find very funny because Twitter banned Donald Trump's Twitter account, but not the Ayatollahs, who has been calling for the death to Jews. There's a scene in Lord of the Rings. How many people watched it? Good. We've got a good audience here who understand it. Where the men and the hobbits and those who are good stand at the black gates of Sauron. And they're surrounded by the evil hordes of Sauron, the orcs, the goblins, and the trolls. And Aragorn, the Christ symbol of the book, comes to the men at that battle, and he says this.
Hold your ground! Hold your ground! Sons of Gondor! Of Rohan! My brothers! I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand! Men of the West!
friends, there may come a day when the trials of the captivity of Judah taken into Babylon come upon us. There may come a day when the trials of the early church martyrs come upon us. There may come a day when the trials of the book of Revelations come upon us. But is this that day? I think not. This is the day we stand. This is the day we fight for liberty, we fight for justice, and we fight for freedom to worship the ever-living God. Thank you very much.
All right, looks like we still have 100% standing ovation now for VAC meetings leading up to 2021. Good job. All right, well, that was great. Thank you so much, Neil. We so appreciate that. I'm glad we ended up on a high note. We thank you guys so much for coming. We're going to do an offering now. This offering, of course, goes to cover the cost of the VAC, getting our speakers. We have speakers upcoming, and VAC is totally donation-run, donation-led. None of us get any salaries. As a matter of fact, Neil gives to the ministry himself, even though he's the president of it, so he's not getting rich off of it. Don't worry, none of us are getting rich off of this. This all goes back into the ministry so that we can afford the location here as the church. They have begun charging us now. And of course, that goes to bring in the speakers that are up and coming. So we really, really appreciate your guys' giving. Don't worry, I'm not going to give a televangelist push up here, but we do so appreciate your guys' giving. Also tonight, we're going to have a meet and greet afterwards. That's a $50 donation. I made crepes this afternoon, strawberry, banana, and Nutella crepes. They're great. So if you'd like to come to that meet and greet, it's a $50 donation. Talk to any of the volunteers. Neil will be there. I'll be there. You get to ask me questions. No, I'm just kidding. You can continue on the conversation with Neil. We'll bring him back up for a Q&A session in a bit. In the meantime, let's see. I went over speakers. We have Dr. Judy coming for next month, so stay tuned for that. If you have not already signed up for the VAC email list, please do that, vac.org/sign-up, so you don't miss any of the emails. Tell your friends. If you don't have a church for tomorrow, please come back. There are two services, 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. Guess which one I'll be at? 11 o'clock. All right. Also, let's see. What was I going to say? I will. I had something else that I was going to say, and I totally blanked on it just now. I am getting old. All right. Well, I'm sure I will rethink of it. That's why I should have written it down on my notes. So you ready to come back up for Q&A then? Oh, I know what it was. If we could please be out of here at 9 o'clock. So we're gonna do a question and answer session. I think, Neil, you can moderate that yourself, right? Yes. I think Methuselah's, yeah. Oh, okay. Is this one the wireless? Or is this one? No, that's the wired. This one's wired. Okay. Methuselah's going to come hook up the Q&A mic. If you guys just want to line up, that'd be great. Neil's going to take your questions. And then feel free, we will, once we're finished with the Q&A session, we can mill around in the foyer. But all right, take it away from the Q&A.
I'll answer the first question. It's always tough for the first question, so we'll go to the second question now in a second. But the first question is obviously going to be, what did I think about what happened on January 6th, right? With storming of the Capitol. We are very clear that violence is only allowed in certain circumstances, and that is to defend yourself, or if you've declared war. The Founding Fathers did not go around approving of attacking the British just randomly. They declared a Declaration of Independence. They made their statements, their intentions known, and then they followed through. So any violence without that is unacceptable. We've maintained that throughout the whole BLM attacks of the burning down villages and all that's completely unacceptable. Meanwhile, the left has been completely hypocritical about it, right? I mean, people have been burning down buildings, killing people, destroying things, and now when a group of people that we also don't agree with the destruction, now they're condemning them. Now all of a sudden it's bad, right? So we can see that. I mean, I'm not fooled, you're not fooled, most of us aren't fooled. It's just hypocrisy. So that's number one. The second thing is there are good indications that there was some sort of other agency going on, doing something in the background, so that's there. But what's interesting, and this is where I have difficulty with, if you walk up to a door that is normally closed and it's open and there are police standing in allowing you to walk in, are you there illegally? Because I've been to the Capitol 3 or 4 times and there are always policemen letting me in. You know, so I'm worried that if I'd been in that situation and I was behind the crowd, didn't see what was going on in front, and was in there, I would be saying, oh, you trespassed. Well, I didn't know that because the policeman was right there letting me in. And if you look at the video, you will see that. So yeah, the people who attacked and broke and destroyed things should be taken into custody and they should be arrested. But the people who followed them in, I mean, you notice, you look, they walked through, they kept to the little lines, all that stuff. yeah, they walked, you know. So there's a lot of that going on. So that's where my dilemma is. Can you really consider them trespassers when they were obviously given permission to walk in? I did write an article on for the EBLM blog site because obviously as a founder of Every Black Lives Matters, we've been condemning the BLM riots all along. And so what do we do when it comes to this? Well, absolutely, we condemn any sort of violence against it. And I talk about that, and I talk about, but here's the other thing you should understand. This was not unprecedented. If you remember in 2017, a few 100,000 people stormed the Wisconsin Capitol because they didn't like Scott Walker. And in fact, or was that 2017? It was one of those years. And in fact, in 2017, a whole bunch of handicapped people stormed the US Capitol because they didn't want Obamacare to be taken away, right? In 1932, a bunch of servicemen, veterans from the First World War, had been betrayed by the administration. They stormed the Capitol. And so it's not unprecedented. It's not something we recommend, but for you to sit there and go, oh, it's so terrible, our democracy is dying. Well, let me tell you, our democracy does not live in the Capitol. And we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Okay.
Testing, testing, testing.
Okay.
Testing, testing, testing. There we go. Is that good? Testing? All right.
Okay.
Say your name first. Sir.
My name is Benjamin Austin. Okay, so I'd like to know what you think about this with the reframing of the definitions. You defined anarchy as the absence of government.
Yeah.
I would define it differently. I would define it as the absence of the state, which is what you described.
Ben and I have this discussion before. I don't know if we want to go into the details, but keep going, yeah. So Ben, describe what you are, just so people know.
So I would define myself as a Christian anarcho-capitalist. So
Yeah.
I believe that governments can be established and should be established through legitimate property ownership. I believe that authority comes from ownership of the land that you say you govern.
And by the way, it's a very valid view. You should look into it. I happen to not tend to that view. I call myself a minarchist, which is not an anarchist, but it's a minimum government type of thing. So it's a variation on that, and there's some things we share alike and some things that we don't. But. What?
Raise it, yeah.
Actually, I'm not even using this. So.
There we go. Okay, so would you think a system like that, under a Christian system where the government does have legitimate ownership, it's not a state, and it's establishing laws at minimum through the No-Hide Covenant, but expanding more on that if the country decides or the city decides to do that. Do you think this would be a good system? And do you think this is something that as Christians we should be like trying to teach to more people and spread the idea?
I think there are a lot of merits to the system. Mm-hmm. I'd have to sit down and look at it more deeply, but I certainly think people should know that. I think kids should know that. They should know all these different systems of government, because a lot of people think it's either this or this. I mean, I just said anarchy, right? And then I jumped to republic. There are variations in between, but they're all still related to representative government in some form or the other. But there are different forms. And so one of the problems that we had with the Constitution, before the Constitution was written, I mean, the reason it was written is because the first Constitution that the states had, or whatever the agreement they had, this was not working. Right? That's why they went back to write the Constitution. And there were a lot of people who didn't want that. They didn't want the federal government having so much power. And in retrospect, maybe they were right? So these are the kind of things. And now with 200 and some years later, we're looking at what the Constitution did. Could it be tweaked a bit? And I think it could be tweaked. In fact, there are certain tweaks that we should certainly do. The question is, how do we get there and what do we do? So I'm not going to answer your question directly just because I don't know enough about the details of where we of that. But I agree that we should study. So folks, look it up. Look up these different forms of the minarchist and anarcho-capitalist system. These are all important terms, and they do have certain variations on how the government should be run. But in the end, it is self-determination. People have the rights, and people are protected. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a relatively niche ideology, so if you're looking for sources on this, it's not very common, but Hans Hermann Hoppe and Tom Woods are good sources to look up for that.
Okay, and if you have my email address.
Tom Woods is actually a Catholic, so like
okay. Send me a link.
Yeah, we'll do.
And I will, if people ask me, I can send it out.
Okay,
thank you, Ben.
Cool.
Appreciate it. You're up, Mike.
Thank you. Just wanted to make a comment. I'm very familiar with the anarcho-capitalist. I wanted to ask, what do you do when somebody's getting raped and you're an anarcho-capitalist, you do not believe there should be a law of the land? When you're, and especially if you're a Christian, and Jesus says that you should care about your neighbor, you should love your neighbor, and there are no institutions, and something bad happens across the street. What do you do about that?
Okay, Mike, I understand.
Thank you.
So yeah, so these are the arguments people have, right? And it's a great argument. It should be had because these are the issues they do. That's why I like minarchists, but but it also has its problems, right?
I'd be happy to answer that question because I'm an anarcho-capitalist who believes in the Murray Rothbardian school of thought. The principle that we need to really
raise the mic up.
Sorry. Yeah, the principle that we need to consider is anarcho-capitalists believe that we own ourselves, that we are sovereign as individuals, we own our bodies, we own the fruits of our labor, we own our property. And in many aspects, the founding fathers were anarcho-capitalists. There are many questions that grow out of anarchy or an anarcho-capitalistic society. We shouldn't be too concerned with answering those questions because it's a difficult hypothetical. We have to concern ourselves with moral absolutes. The reality is that when government imposes itself upon human beings, if we are free and sovereign individuals, do we have consent? The question I would pose is, when you mentioned that we have to script a new document to declare our independence, I would claim in order to avoid violence or to justify a potentially violent movement to recapture our liberty, haven't we already done that? The Declaration of Independence did that for us.
So you're saying yes, yeah.
The Articles of Confederation, which I would also like to hear how they were inadequate, I would contend that they were more than adequate. The states are sovereign. We have to recognize that. A couple of questions I have for you. Are the states sovereign? Do they have the right to secede? And number two, hasn't the Constitution already given us a basis on which to wage resistance to a regime that has become oppressive to its ends?
Okay, so those are great questions. So, and let me summarize what he's saying. Since we already have a Declaration of Independence, do we have to declare again that we are breaking from it? I think the reason I say that is because I don't want, if we are going to gather together, then we should first gather together and let them know that we are holding ourselves to the Declaration. I don't want it to be a bunch of rebels fighting all over the place. Because I've lived in countries like that where you've got a balkanization and then you've got multiple. It ends up being Somalia again, right? And so we definitely don't want that. We want the people to gather together and then make a statement and then let other people understand what the statement is and where we're coming from and then see if there is an issue there. Now, let me answer the next one. Do we have the right to secede? Absolutely. And this is where I disagreed. This is where I disagreed with Lincoln. Now, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. Did the South have the right to secede from the Union? Absolutely, because they joined the Union voluntarily, and there was nothing in the declaration of their federal system that said that they couldn't leave the Union. So absolutely, I agree with 100%. Now, I hate the fact that they would have left and slavery would have continued there, but let me tell you this. Slavery was a dying system, economically non-viable. It was a lot, think about it, it's a lot cheaper to hire 4 contractors to work as hard as they can and pay them for what they yield than to enslave 10 men. And to get those 10 men to work, you had to hire 4 other men to capture them, and then you had to keep them enslaved, and then you had to feed them, and then you had to take care of their wives and their daughters, and then you have this huge ecosystem that you have to maintain. It was just not viable. The South was dying on the vine. In fact, why was the North so powerful and so rich? Because slavery didn't work, and the North understood that. So it would not last. So yeah, so if you think, and that's just to say, did they have the right to secede? Yeah, they should have been given the right to secede and then hung themselves on their own noose.
And I just have one final question. In what capacity are Republicans classically liberal?
So this is another issue. In fact, if you look at the original Republicans, when Lincoln took over, he was not classically liberal in any sense of the word. In fact, he was big government. He was bigger government than some of the Democrats, right? So, and in fact, remember what Lincoln did. And again, I don't, my wife and I have this argument all the time because I didn't grow up here, so I don't have this allegiance to Lincoln like most people do. And I think Lincoln did a lot of bad things. I mean, he suspended habeas corpus, which means no evidence. He could put people in jail for any reason or no reason at all. So these are all bad things that ended up being good in the long run. It did some good. You're right. But I don't think that the people who joined the Republican Party now, at least in the last few years, most of us are classical liberals.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the leadership is not.
I would just, in closing, say that an alternative would be the libertarian philosophy.
Yeah, which I have trouble with, being a minarchist. So.
Thank you.
By the way, I don't want to go off on this whole anarcho-capitalist stuff because a lot of people don't know about it. What we should do is have a speaker to introduce these different concepts, and then you guys, right? So.
Can I answer real quick, 30 seconds?
Yeah.
What's wrong with first of all, the concept of sovereignty? How many people have a problem with the concept of sovereignty? In the Bible, what is the hierarchy of things? The hierarchy of people is God is first, then is man, right? Then is nature. So how can anyone who's a Christian say the sovereignty means that I get to make my own laws? That's the first problem. So that was the capital sin when man, instead of obeying God's law, became a law unto himself. Does that sound like anarcho-capitalism?
Well, again,
because it sounds like that to me. Okay?
Yeah.
So my friend, who is a speaker, Ravi Zacharias, who mentored me in the past, he explained to me, he was the first person, the only person who ever made sense to me of what freedom is. He said that freedom cannot be understood apart from design. If you say, what's a hammer good for? Well, what was it designed for? To pound nails, to break things, stuff like that. If you ask the question, what's a horse good for? Well, what it was designed for. If I ask you a question, what is a man good for? Who defines what a man is and what is a good for? That is God. So you cannot say the man is a law unto himself and I get to decide whatever I want to do, right? You can't do that. That is anarchy. That's subjectively determining what I want to do with myself or my body or how I want to treat other people. That's subjectivism. In Christianity, we believe that God is the law of all things, that is the top of all hierarchies.
Okay.
That's the problem with libertarianism. That
Yeah,
is
but again,
misunderstood.
Mike, I don't want to.
Thank you so much. I just
Maybe we
didn't
can have
want
a
that.
debate up here, right? Well, guess who it is?
Haha. We're not expecting this. All right, so this is a question.
This is my daughter, the lawyer.
Hi. Lawyer.
She's not 7 anymore.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that. I had a question. I was wondering if other people were wondering this too. What do we do about the rhinos? They confuse me so much, I don't even know what to
Yeah,
think
so
about them.
my daughter lives on a steady diet of Ben Shapiro. And a few other things. She comes and asks me these questions. I'm like, I hadn't heard that. It's like, well, Dad, so-and-so said this. How come you haven't listened to him? I'm like, oh, I haven't listened to him yet. So, yeah, the Rhino, by the way, in case you don't know, is Republican in name only. Now, here's the problem as one of the last questions. I didn't get your name, by the way. Do connect with me later. Mentioned is that not all Republicans, remember, the Christians went to the Republican Party earlier on because of slavery. And then there was a time when they were drifting away from them, and then they came back again in the 80s under Reagan, right? So it is a party that we define. It's closer to what we align with, and therefore it is our job to then mold it into what we want it to be. So a Rhino is a Republican in name only, basically is a Mitt Romney, right? So where they're old school, progressive, but they act very they're elitist. So the only way we can do is we have to elect them out, right? We have to vote them out. That's the only way. There's no and we got to get rid of them. The problem is you can't get rid of them unless you have a good base of conservatives or classical liberals behind them, and that's what the problem is. Yeah, well, we don't put them in, yeah, but you've got to. The Tea Party did a very good job of getting rid of some rhinos, and now we just have to continue that. Yes.
So I don't really have a question, but I have more of a comment.
Oh, okay. Well, let's limit the comments, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a Christian. I don't have any title on certain denomination or whatever. Like that guy in the red shirt, he was saying there's a title, but I don't have that. I don't know much about politics, but I just joined in. I didn't vote. But I think if we are, just as a comment, if we are given any title or any place in politics or any space to speak, I think the centerpiece should be the blood of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And Him crucified and the power of God that can change somebody's life.
Amen. And that is, by the way, exactly why men and women in the world have done what they've done. The freeing of the slaves, right? William Wilberforce in England becomes a Christian, and he realizes what God has done for him and that the slave is his brother, right? And he's moved to change him. Telemachus walks into the gladiatorial pits in Rome and pleads with them to stop the killing in the pits. And they kill him. But the emperor then sees that, who was a Christian, and says, this has got to stop. So over and over again, we see that Christ has moved us to do that. Yes. Thank you.
Point about our sovereignty. There's a thing called the Convention of States, which I haven't heard anybody talk about.
Yeah.
But it's a way of regaining our control of the government through the Convention of States.
Yeah. So basically there's an idea, and Mark Levin pushes this a lot. The idea is the Convention of States is you call a Convention of States and you create more amendments and things like that. There's a group of people who disagree with that. There's a group of people they're afraid that if you do Convention of States, it will ruin the Republic. There's a group of people who say, no, it won't ruin the Republic. So there's a big argument there. I'm kind of neutral about it. I'd be interested to see what would happen if they did meet. They should do a trial convention of the states. And maybe they already had one, I don't remember. But it would be very interesting to see. But I don't know. We have 26 states right now. To any convention of states, it would have to need at least 3/4 of majority to pass anything, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So it would be interesting to see how you could get there, too.
Hello, my name is Tom Nowinski. I'm not real versed and studied in the Constitution per se, but I've been hearing a lot about the Insurrection Act thrown around. So I need some clarity on that, and I'm not coming from the Democrats' camp. I'm coming from the actual real Insurrection Act.
Yeah.
What legal claim does it have, and does Donald Trump have a possibility of using that act?
So this is one of the questions I can't answer. Because, one, I've not sat down and studied it, right? So I can't speak to it. So that's the main reason. And the second thing is that there's so much going around. I would actually have to sit down and read it and then look at all the legal. Because here's the thing, here's one of the problems that always bothers me. You can look at you can look at the words, and then you have to figure out what stupid way will a judge interpret it. right? Because I've seen something that are very clear. I mean, who would have thought we would have gotten Roe v. Wade out of the Constitution of the United States? Who, right? Nobody, right? So that's the other thing is that, so it has two pieces. One, what does the act actually say? And two, what will a judge rule if it ever gets to a judge, right? So, at the end of the day, it's who's going to execute it, right? Who's going to carry it out?
Yeah, there's a lot of components to it that I can see. I'll continue to pray that the Father has his hand on this nation.
We pray so too,
and we continue to wait for his move.
Yeah.
Because it's his turn now.
Yeah. But thank you.
Hi, Neil. Thank you for coming tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so my question, maybe comment, I'm so with you when you were talking about the opportunity for the church, the ecclesia, the governing body of Christ to occupy the positions that are available for influence, right? To bring about the reformation that needs to happen. So I guess my question is, how can we begin to mobilize, really? Like, I was thinking about, like, having, a Christian super PAC, or, like, we have churches here that make, they make good money through tithes and offerings and things like that, and they have programs. But now, like, if we can kind of bring that in and have that money go for things like supporting a politician that we raise up out of our community. Right. You know what I mean? So how can we begin to bring that into reality? Because we can talk and say this, we want to do this, but we have to be about works too, right? So maybe we can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, so this has been one of my biggest frustrations as a U.S. citizen, right? I mean, I came here, and it took me 12 years to become a U.S. citizen, and the day I got my citizenship paper, and I was signing the guys who were trying to get me to register to vote was the League of Women Voters. And I knew they were liberal, so I said, I'm not signing your thing. So I went to some fair, and there was a Republican table, and I said, I want to register to vote. And he started talking to me, and he said, oh, you got to run for office. Because I knew more, because I had to become a citizen, I had to study the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So he said, you know more about the Constitution than a lot of people. He said, you should run for office. So I said, yeah, sure. And ever since then, and I didn't make it, I was running for Republican Central Committee. And I didn't know what I was doing, which is fine. But ever since then, it's been frustrating me because the church is not being involved. Now think about it. Who else has a gathering of 300,000 groups consisting of something like 20 to 30 million people every week? Bible studies. Right. Where else would be the most powerful way to focus and pass the word and transmit the word to all these Bible studies? I mean, it doesn't have to be the same thing, but the whole idea that we should mobilize, that would be the place I would mobilize. And that's why I wrote my book, Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why isn't your church? And it's in the back there. But it says, I go through a list of things that we should do. And there's a whole bunch of them there. This is what we should do, this is what we should do, this is what we should do. The problem is the churches are afraid because of the Johnson Amendment.
Right,
But the Johnson Amendment is useless because nobody's ever been sued. By the way, just so you don't know what the Johnson Amendment is, back in the 50s, Johnson, who became president, Lyndon Johnson, was a senator in Texas, or some maybe I don't know, he was something in Texas, and a group of nonprofits thought he was corrupt, and he was corrupt, and so they started petitioning and using their nonprofit money to campaign against him, and he didn't like that, so he passed a tax amendment that said that if you are a nonprofit, you can't say anything political. Mm-hmm. Well, since then, every church has been, and he didn't mean it for the churches, but since then, every church has been afraid to say anything political. Well, in a few years ago, I think like 10, 20 years ago, FRC and a bunch of people said, okay, we're going to try to challenge this, and they would have pastors on Freedom Pulpit Sunday, which is I think in September, October. They would come up and they would actually preach a very political sermon, and they would send it to the IRS and said, come after me. And the IRS never did, because they know that the minute it's challenged in court, oh, can you hear me? Okay, the minute it's challenged in court, it's going to die, right? Especially now with this court, right? So I think it's an educational process. How do we get there? I have a list of things. There's a flyer out there called Salt and Light, which if you take it to your church, whatever church you go to, and you try to...
I go here right
Oh, you
now.
go here, which is, yeah, so then you're fine. This church is very active, as you know. But in most churches, if you can start a Salt and Light chapter, then we can start moving and mobilizing people. But that's where it has to go. It has to go to the point where the pastors are actually getting involved personally, because the people follow the shepherd.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, Neil.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. I'm Victoria. Thank you for being here. My question is, how would you go about overcoming the brainwashing of the media and big tech and all the censorship going on?
Well, the beautiful thing is that they're kicking it off social media. And that is a beautiful thing. Because for so long, we've been telling Christians, get off there and go to something else. And we've been looking for something else to be started, and it was never started. So now they're forcing us to do that. So I think that's beautiful. The fact that the president got kicked off Parler, Twitter, right, is now on Parler. And then Apple says, we don't want you to have Parler on your iPhone. So I'm saying, okay, stop buying iPhones, right? Now Google said we're not going to keep it in the Play Store, but Google, you can't do that. You can just still download it. Just say, how do I upload Parler without Google Play? And you can still upload it, right? So these are the venues that we have to go and we have to mobilize. What the Christians need to understand is that it's time that we take back control of these things. Because at the end of the day, they look at the almighty dollar, and let me tell you, there are a lot more of us than there are of them, right? I mean, remember one call by Mike Huckabee, and you know who the biggest chain in the world, the biggest money-making chain in the, one of the top chains in the world is Chick-fil-A, right? Now, is Chick-fil-A better than every other sandwich in the world? No, but it stands for something. Of course, Chick-fil-A guys will say, what do you mean we're not better than everybody else? But I'd eat Chick-fil-A any day. Why? Because I know what they stand for, and if they stop standing for it, and there was some hints that they may be, we're going to abandon them. So I think that's where we go. We need to be taking over. I actually like that they're deplatforming us. I actually like that they're deplatforming us because it's going to force us to take action and it's going to force alternatives. It's just the same way like we finally realized that the media was nonsense, right? I mean, think about, yeah, people still get free ABC, CBS, NBC, but think of how many people don't get it from there. Right? So I'm not worried about that. I think it's great. And as long as you keep the government out of it, the only way you can have a monopoly is if the government is controlling it. I mean, I'll give you a quick story of how the government controls monopoly. Imagine there are 4 railway stations, railway companies. And each railway company has their own peculiarities. Let's say my railway company is old and decrepit, and my carriages are kind of breaking down. Well, guess what? I'm going to cut my rates because you don't want to travel on my trains unless it's really cheap. So I give you a really cheap rate. Well, the guy who has the best railway company can't do that. So from San Francisco to New York, I'm going to charge $80 and he's going to charge you $120. But after I start charging $80, he has to have a price war. So he drops his price and then I drop my price and we get in this big price war. And he says, look guys, this is not going to work. And he calls all the 4 railway guys together and we all meet and he says, look, we can't have a price war because we'll all lose money. Neil, why don't you just at least stick to $90? Because I can manage that and then we'll give him all these extra things. So I say, okay, fine, I'll deal with you. So I change my price to $90, he changes it back to $120 and we're going. And after a while I realized, I need a new infrastructure. I need to get more people on my train and I mean, my trains cost nothing. I'm going to drop my price to $80 again. And there's another price war, and it goes on and on. And then they call us all together, and they say, this is it. So finally, the rich guy says, I can't do this. I'm going to lose money. And he calls his favorite lobbyist and his favorite senator, and he says, you got to pass a law because Neil's trains are not safe. The people need safer trains. That's how monopolies are created. You need a government to control a monopoly. If they're all free enterprise, we're fine. I guess this will be the last one because we're at 8 o'clock. So, okay. Do you guys want to go longer? I mean, I don't want to bore you to death or anything. Okay, we'll go for a few more minutes. Yeah.
All right, 2 points and 1 question.
Yes.
Point 1, you had mentioned that slavery was dying and it was on its way to deathbed. I believe that human trafficking is alive and well in this nation, and it is a bad thing, and it is ever growing. So it's
absolutely.
replenishable.
Human trafficking, again, we should stand for rights.
Right.
So. The question was not about did the slaves have the rights. The question was, and that's what the West should have, the North should have definitely passed the Freedom of the Slaves Emancipation Proclamation,
which was
they
January 1st, by the way.
Pardon?
Which was January 1st.
Oh, it was, okay. But at the same time, they couldn't allow the South not to secede, yeah.
Right. Good. Point 2. The question was about insurrection, and I read this every week just so that I can make sure that I'm on board with it. I'm going to read it again. The Insurrection Act of 1807 and the Emergency Economic Powers Act are United States federal laws that govern the ability of the President of the United States to deploy military troops within the United States to put down lawlessness, insurrection, and rebellion. So that is what it is. The third component of this that I wanted to...
So obviously with that, there is a danger, right? So I always say, anytime you give a president power, a president that you like power, a president that you don't like will have the same power. So
well, he's the commander-in-chief, so he is
the
forerunner of the military.
So the problem is that the things that we always worry about is that, okay, so he does it for a good reason. Well, the next guy, 2024 when Kamala Harris runs, will she then use that for bad, right? So I always worry about things like that. Again, as I have not studied it, but go ahead, yeah.
So the point I wanted to mention before I walk away would be, I think the second term of Woodrow Wilson was when the government changed.
Did he have a second term? I thought.
And that was with the banking system.
Yeah.
When he
but
kind of
did
sold
Woodrow
us
Wilson get a second term? I thought he
didn't, but when he was running for his second term before he left, before he walked away, he handed over the United States of America Corporation.
Yes, to the Federal Reserve.
To the Federals.
Yeah. So, by the way, let me explain the background. The Federal Reserve, Woodrow Wilson, one of the worst presidents we ever had in the world. And let me blame the person who's at fault, Teddy Roosevelt. Because Teddy had been president. He decided not to run again. He handed it over to his vice president, who ran and won. And then he suddenly decided he wanted to be president again. And so he ran against his own vice president, split the vote. They still got 38 to 39 votes. I mean, 39%. They got more than 67% of the vote or something like that. But Woodrow Wilson, who had no chance in winning, got 40% or something. And so he took the presidency, and he started the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve basically is a private group of banks. We had no income tax before that, right? And you're like, no income tax? No, we didn't have an income tax before 1913 or whatever it was. And so I am hoping to get a great author to come speak about that. His name is E.W. Griffin, right? Griffin. I've reached out to him. We're just going to try and schedule him. He wrote the book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's this thick, but I'm telling you, it's a great read. Read it. It is an amazing book. We have a kids version. We actually occasionally would sell a kids version of it, which is done by the Tuttle twins, but we don't have it today. But anyway.
Just a quick question. Can you talk generally with us about the cancel culture?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, it's very generic. I mean, the whole concept of the cancel culture is basically that if they don't like what you're saying, they disparage you and they demean you and they call you names. I mean, it's the whole thing of you. It's the Saul Alinsky method, right? The best way is to mock something and then to call it evil and to demonize it. And so the cancel culture basically is that we're going to get rid of you if you're pro-life. In fact, right now, from what I heard, Twitter is canceling all pro-life accounts too, right? So that's sort of the cancel culture right there. We're going to cancel you on that. But what they don't realize is that, fine, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, because I think eventually... Now, here's the only problem. If I leave Facebook, how am I going to argue with liberals? So I stay on Facebook just to goad my liberal friends, just to mock them and to write things that would make them angry. But if you don't want to know what I really think about, go to MeWe, because that's where I'm at. So anyway. So the cancel culture basically is that, and it's very dangerous because all conservatives are going to be canceled at some point by the culture. So, yeah, MEWE, MeWe.com. Now, there are other ones that are out there, and that's the beauty about the free market. the best one will kind of work itself out eventually.
Neil, thank you for giving me an extra little minute. I feel this is very important, and I've been dying to share this with you and everybody else. You see presently that there's an attempt to make the Republican Party look stainless and elevate it to divine status almost, and anything to make the Democrats look bad. And it's true, Democrats are not a good party. Republican Party, I'm thankful for everything they're doing, but I believe that there's some dangers if we use the terminology of the BLM, of the Democratic Party, and as well as Karl Marx's lingo that we associate, not intentionally, but by what we're saying. Karl Marx was also supposedly opposed to slavery. So you've got to really get to the heart of what slavery is, what does the Bible say about it, and how it's implemented. There are terrible marriages, bad marriages, but we don't say marriage, get rid of it, it's awful. Right. There are some good marriages. But anyway.
I'm worried where this is going.
What's that? Okay. So the Republican Party tried to set forth the Corwin Amendment. Are you familiar with that? No. The Corwin Amendment, I believe 1863, maybe even before, was an attempt by the Republican Party to permanently institutionalize slavery in the continent of America, and then that way there would be no more discussion. It's called the Corwin Amendment. Highly recommend everyone check it out. Supported by Abraham Lincoln, by the way. Okay. That's the Corwin Amendment.
How do you spell that?
What's that?
How do you spell that?
Corwin, C-O-R-W-I-N,
okay,
I believe,
I'll look it up.
Something like that.
Okay.
Please look it up. It's amazing. The truth is always better than going along with what sounds good. It really is. It sets you free, and you know you're standing on solid ground. Also, the famous Emancipation Proclamation and all the cartoons that were done at the time make Lincoln look out as almost like a Jesus savior, right. Rescuing the blacks.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is that Declaration Proclamation was a political military move that said that slaves in the occupied territories would be released. Hoping to get some kind of insurrection on the part of the slaves, but yet if you were in the Northern Territories,
right. So there were two. So just so you know, there were two states to whom the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply. They were in the North. So he didn't free the slaves in the North. He only frees the slaves in the South. So you can see it was a political game. But I think what came out of it, again.
Yeah, I mean, he was under a lot of pressure. There were abolitionists talking in his ear, and he said, "Well, what's the best solution? I'll do this Emancipation Proclamation," but no one was really freed from that. I would love to find out if there was one name of a person.
Yeah. But it carried through, though, to when the Union was intact, right?
Ultimately, after the war,
and then you had
with the 13th Amendment, which was actually championed by a Southern Democrat, believe it or not. I know his name. So that was the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863. Why is it that the Union brought in a slave state in 1863 in the middle of the war, which was Delaware and West Virginia? Does anybody know that? Anyway, so my point is that the Union did not go in to fight against slavery, which is a common misperception. It's moral, what do you call it? Just virtue signaling, really, on the part of us to say that.
And so this is what I said since I came here. I wasn't like, I didn't see Abraham Lincoln. I was ready to see all his awards and everything. From what I've read, I think Abraham Lincoln originally wanted to send the slaves back to Africa.
That was what I was going to say. He was part of the American colony program where free blacks, I found it wasn't just slaves, but free blacks would be sent back to Liberia because he believed that the two people groups could not get along with each other.
And this is from my reading and from my discussion, I believe that after he met Frederick Douglass, that changed his mind completely.
Okay.
So I think Frederick Douglass was the impetus, because yes, originally he was, but then towards the end you see he wasn't, and this was after he had met Frederick Douglass and read his books and stuff. So my understanding of that, and we have the chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation here somewhere who could actually add. Just go back to the EBLM book booth. Kevin McGarry is my co-founder of EBLM, and he's also the chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation of California.
Thank you for your commitment to the truth, Neil. I love
Thank
that.
you.
That is wonderful. Anyway,
but I think the summary is that all these men have their warts, just like Washington had slaves and Jefferson had slaves.
Yeah,
too.
and if
so
we
have to understand.
run with the warts that aren't true, we can inadvertently be validating the other side. You know,
yes,
if
absolutely.
we're not careful.
Okay.
So
we'll do one last question with Kevin. Kevin, make it an easy one, buddy. No sermons. Kevin is good at sermons.
This is actually just an advertisement.
Oh, okay, yes.
So this is a great opportunity to get off of Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and all that kind of stuff. Your friend and mine built USA.life.
Yes.
It's a Christian, conservative social media.
Andrew.
USA.
David Andrew.
Life. And USA.life, yeah. So
David
come and
Andrew.
join me.
David Andrew? David Andrew.
Stephen
David.
He used to go to this church.
I know him as Steve Krotowski, but
so we know him, and he built it, and he manages it, he runs it. He is a full-on solid. He's also
so
a pastor.
you should definitely look that up too. Again, these things are going to have to shake out with competition and whatever gives you the best service, but you should definitely try all these out. I am looking for someone out there in the ether to write an app where I can share it to one of these things and we'll share to all of them automatically. And copy back from all of them back to one app that I want. So that's what I'm looking for. Last one, fine, we'll give you the last one, buddy.
Love you, Neil.
I love you too, buddy.
Known this guy for a while. Have been lost track of him for a while.
At least 10, 15 years, right?
Do you think that it would be good to have maybe a contingency plan?
You mean for the 20th?
And for the church?
You mean for the 20th, after the 20th, or are you talking about just in general? I don't know what you mean.
You can read it however you want. I'm trying to be short. This is my attempt at being short. Yeah.
Contingency is good. I don't know where. Yeah.
Well, you're thinking, that's good. But I don't live in a world of unicorns and rainbows. So. Do you guys?
Sure.
So tell you what, if you want, I'll do something. I'll make a presentation to you folks, and you can think about
send me something.
Or I'll send you something, an email. My people will email
your
my
people. Yeah. Have your people call my people, and they can do lunch.
We'll do that. Enough said.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you all. You've been great.
And then Neil, thank you for speaking in honor of Chinese New Year and CCP virus.
I get a Chinese
gift card to take your wife
to
out
dinner.
And then
hey, we pay the speakers. I don't get.
That's why we're paying you. All right. Hey, guys, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. We went a little bit over, but come back to church tomorrow. Spend some time out fellowshipping in the foyer. Neil will be back there taking questions.
Buy a book for your grandkids.
Yes. Buy a book. Buy a lot of books. He'll autograph them. I'll autograph them. Whatever it takes to buy them. No, but enjoy. Have a great time of fellowship out there, and let's try to be out of here by 9. Oh, and so let's once again give a big thank you to Neil and the Mammon family. Oh, the meet and greet. The meet and greet, you can talk to one of the VAC volunteers and get the info on that. Also, there was something else. The Recall Newsom. If you'd like to sign that, it's really getting traction now, which is great. There's the Recall Newsom pages back at the info table if you'd like to sign those. All right, have a wonderful evening. See you guys back here in the morning for church.
Right, like the first kid I knew, and then the last.
Neil, mute your mic.
They're taking advantage because they know that I'm not going to be harsh with them. So.